wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is getting to a place of yes for more children. And this comes from a listener's email. So before we jump into that, we'd love to remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au and on the homepage, join up to our tribe with your email address. And once a week, we'll shoot you an email with links to everything we put in the world. And you can pick and choose where you'd love to dive deeper. And then occasionally we send you another email that's a little bit more intimate than what social media allows. So if you'd love a little bit more nourishing of your mother during the week, then jump on to join our tribe. So, Bridget, we had this private message from, or maybe it was on a socials post from a listener, and I would love to read it to you. I would so love to hear you guys do a podcast on your thoughts on how you know when you're done having kids, especially in the light of Bridget's coming to a place of yes with her partner for a baby number 3. Would love your thoughts on navigating these discussions consciously. Posting here just in case it's already been discussed and one of the tribe members can point me to an episode. And thank you as always for the labour you put into this group. I know how much work this is.
I remember that now. It was one of our gorgeous members in our private group that wrote that. So, and I love how much we get inspiration for our podcast from, you know, your stories. So
Cool.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that to us. It's been a really conscious path to get to.
Super conscious, actually.
Yeah.
Like when you think back, like you and I were talking yesterday on, I can remember you like almost literally giving birth to Sylvia and being like, I'm not done.
Yeah, I didn't feel done.
Yeah.
And I think, and some people, I know some people really do. Like they're very conscious about, I'm having 2 children, I'm having 1 child, and that's it. And
I don't want to go there again.
Yeah. But there was still a real sense that I did want to go there again, and that there was, I just didn't feel that sense of finishing.
Of doneness.
And I was thinking back actually to being at the wellness summit with Sylvie, who was like 3 weeks old, wrapped in a sling. We were having these same conversations, and even amidst like, you know, that newborn haze of like no sleep and, you know, just the upheaval of navigating growing your family, there was still a real part of me that had that aspiration. But also seeing that I had to really be open to how it could unfold, knowing that
because there was complexity there, because you also had this kind of anxiety-ish knowing that your husband was done.
Yeah, that he, and particularly, you know, everyone would say, oh, you've got a boy and a girl, like, oh, you're done now. Like, and people would say to me, oh, you know, your family's complete. And they'd say that to me and I'd be...
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And I imagine also, I wonder for your mum, because she obviously had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and she was done.
Yeah.
And sometimes moving beyond our own family story is really challenging.
And there's been some real beliefs that I've had to come up against with that because, you know, my mum's story is also that she would have liked to have a 3rd. But,
really?
Yeah, but she had chronic fatigue syndrome, and that really I don't think she had the support that she needed perceived she needed to get to that place.
Yeah.
And it was also something that I was aware of growing up, that I wished that I had another sibling.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, so I do see it, you know, as a, you know, if we look at family constellations and the family legacy, I do wonder if it's part of me fulfilling part of what, you know, that what she was seeking to create in her family as well. But that it's my generation to break through that all of the reasons why I can't. Because there was another belief that cropped up when I was with our acupuncturist, who's also our therapist. and I was like, you know, part of me is like, well, who am I to like have 3 healthy children? Like, who am I to
be that lucky,
or even be that take up that much space, you know? And you know, then ensued that whole who are you not to, and I get all that on an intellectual level, and as you and I both do, but sometimes breaking through the intellectual land of yes, we get this, and landing it in our bodies is a bigger piece. And that's really been the process, I think, of choosing and consciously creating a third pregnancy or third baby. And that journey has been, a lot of back and forth with my husband and I on unwillingness to go there.
So I think if you can take us back, what I'd love to start with perhaps is the rising sense of anxiety, perhaps some feelings of deprivation at the thought if you've played ahead and he won't get there. Like, let's say we've played this out in our mind. I'm thinking about our listeners. I'm certainly thinking about myself and the processes, and I'm wondering if it's your story too. You kind of cast ahead how your partner's going to be and how they're not going to want this. And then so you were almost in the same moment as wishing and wanting, feeling a sense of loss and deprivation. Sorry, we're podcasting outside today, so you may hear some background noises.
Like a bus. just went fast.
It's a hot day, so we thought we'd sit outside. Anyway, and I can get that concept of it almost feels too big to ask for, let alone get to the point of feeling like it was an equal yes, because their no, your yes, perhaps even can't really own your yes and say, I want this thing. Maybe it's still you have feelings and beliefs around it's not okay. Like I can't take up that space. I can't encroach on someone else's desires for life. And these feelings perhaps of loss or grief or deprivation that creep in when we play that story out in our own heads. So I'm just kind of painting the picture where I can completely get how we're there. So were you there?
Yeah, and I think I was really there from the perspective of, can my relationship hold this? Like, can my relationship handle this? Particularly because, we're on this conscious parenting path, and that requires you to really deeply grow in relationship to your children and your partner if you're wanting to ensure that everybody in the family is feeling fulfilled and connected and, able to grow. And, that we're all looking at our stories and busting them and being willing to level up in our behaviour. That when we're asking ourselves to do that, naturally expanding your family is going to bring more growth, and with that, the process of growth is pain. And so certainly that has been, in the early days, a conversation that I was having in my own head and also with my husband around.
So how did that look? How did that look in your own head and body to even get to the point where you could verbalize, I actually really want this? Because I think about having that conversation in my body, all I can feel is anxiety because he doesn't. And it's almost like asking someone out on a date who you're madly in love with and they reject you.
It started off a lot with jokes, right? So humour as a path, which is part of my husband and I's language. Because it's an icebreaker, because it paves the way for deeper conversations. And so,
it's like kidding, not kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so it would be a running joke of, he would make some comments about like our daughter being hard work or it being a long night and like never again, and I'd be like, we're not done here, and so a lot of that back and forth, a little bit of kind of teasing, a little bit of
it's almost like planting a seed, isn't it?
Yeah, and just letting him know like this conversation's still open. This conversation is not done, and that we can play around it for as long as we need to play around it until we can get to a place of real conversation.
Because you almost need to play your way through the initial feelings of perhaps what I'm talking about, like the really hard feelings.
Yeah.
So you're kind of playing around them
and
release them a bit.
Yeah.
Before you can get to the crux, because you couldn't just go from zero to hero and have that deep conversation.
No.
So yeah, that's really genius. I totally get that.
And, and it would happen like with other people, we'd go places and family might say, oh, so you're done now? And I'd be like, I don't feel done. And Marcus would be like, I think we're done, but he would still say it in a joking way, which also told me that he knows that conversation's not over, and that he's open to that conversation and that when the timing's right for us to lean into that, we will. And we were talking back and forth about it, and it was always, up in the air earlier this year. And then when we were away in Broome in June, I had the conversation with him in the car. It was just him and I. And he was like a flat out no. He was like, I can't imagine it right now. Like, Sylvie just feels so hard. I just don't even know how we'd like stay on top of the house we've got and the kids we've got. And that was really hard to hear.
What sort of feelings came up for you in hearing that?
Like,
because you're kind of holding out hope until this point in time. Like, the playing is also hope.
Totally, yeah. And also that the playing, as long as you're playing around and you're not having the deep conversation and the confrontation about it, the playing creates possibility. When you go straight to that hard and fast conversation, or even, you know, even like the pushing, if you're pushing them, it pushes them away. So I was also well aware of that too, that there's an approach, there's a communication that we need to understand works well and doesn't work well with our partners. And so, yeah, in my body, I was just feeling this sense of, I guess, real heaviness and anxiety at hearing that, but also I could also at the same time recognize that was his view in this moment based on the pressures that he was feeling being away on holiday with all of my family, and him feeling the weight of that, which I didn't feel because I had no weight. Like, I was having a great time, but I didn't recognize that he was having a hard time, and that felt like parenting was hard. And so that we kind of left that there, and then we'd gotten home and I was unpacking.
So did you feel like it was a closed door at that point?
I didn't feel like it was a closed door, but I felt like it was uphill from there. I felt like it was going to take a lot for him to come around and really be willing again. Okay,
so I just want to tease this out because this is actually quite interesting. So even though it's a no from him, you know your want deeply enough that you're like, okay, this might just take a bit longer.
Yeah.
So it was in your mind, in some level, conscious or otherwise, always going to happen.
I also tend to generally get what I want.
But that's only because you feel worthy enough to have what you want.
But that's a dance, right? Like even that self-worth and building that self-worth is a dance because in relationship, you know, the mirror, like I was thinking about rejection and how we seek approval and like there's certain ways in which I don't care. Like I don't care if someone out there who I don't even know rejects me or doesn't approve of me. I couldn't care. But, you know, the mirror and the intimacy of my closest relationship, those are hard places to go to. So yeah, I still really knew that was a sore point, a sore space, but that if I could also allow his feelings to be what they were in that moment and for me to hear them but not take them as gospel, then we could see an alternative, you know, down the track. And so when we got home and I was unpacking, I think it was really landing with me more. And I think I was like, I might have been like packing away Sylvie's clothes from the holiday. And it's sort of sitting with me like, what if I don't get to put another baby in clothes like these? Like, what if this is like, what if we're done here with like toddler stuff? What if we're done here with baby? I don't feel done there. And so I was really almost processing like a sense of mourning around that, and I was crying, you know, and he was like, oh, what's up? And I was like, you know, I'm really having to feel through what it feels like to hear that you say you're done, because I really don't feel that, and it's hard for me to hear.
I love your just honesty in that. And
accept
because there's no guessing, right? There's no assumptions required from him because you've literally spelt it out.
And, you know, that's also hard for him to see me
in pain.
Yeah. And so he's not like rushing to my side, but he's processing that in his own way, you know. And I also accept that. And so then we left it for a while, and then we had another conversation. I can't remember what was in between, but another conversation happened a couple of months later.
Are you having protected sex during this time?
How did we do it? I think he was just pulling out.
Okay, yeah. So in some way.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was
it's still not a yes.
But he was very like making sure he was pulling out like, well, you know,
right,
he was not like, he was not wanting any accidents, right?
Okay. I just wondered what that other side of consciousness was, you know.
And that, I mean, we'll get to that. That's a really telling shift, right?
Oh, okay.
And And then we'd had a conversation a couple of months later about like, you know, if we were to have another child, like, and he saw how important it was for me to have a home birth. That he didn't know that he could show up in the way that I wanted him to.
So the next conversation you've had, he's now saying, if we do, here's what I can't do. So he's almost done that shift. So between you showing up with total honesty and not expecting an outcome, just showing up and letting that be, he's taken that and processed from an absolute no to an entertaining of an idea. If we did, here's what it would need to come with. Right? That's pretty amazing.
It is. And I think it's also a call to him, because I talk a lot to him about boundaries and the boundaries that I'm really looking to build for myself and in relationship to the children, so that everyone knows where they kind of stand, and also that like if I don't respect my own boundaries, then you know I will lose myself and I will lose my shit. You know, so like I talk to him often because he'll like give to them,
beyond boundaries,
and then get really frustrated. And I'm like, okay, that's because you didn't listen. There was a point there where you felt like you didn't want to anymore and you kept doing it.
Yeah.
And so part of that's come out, I guess, in terms of him coming back to me and talking to me about what his boundaries are.
So tell us about that conversation.
And so he was saying, you know, I never want to take away from you what you really want. Like, I know you really want that experience, but I just don't know that I can be in that space the way that you really want me to. And it came as a shock to me, because I found him to be really amazing with my births and really being able to be with me and be present to me, even though I know he doesn't love birth, like and he finds it, he doesn't like hospitals, he doesn't like blood, he doesn't like, you know, there's lots of things he doesn't like around the whole thing, and which is hard for someone like me who has such a high value on it to honour that, but I really seek to try to meet him there. So it was a shock to hear that, but I also was like, okay, like, all right. So what would that look like? He's like, oh, I don't know, like maybe I'll just like take the kids and then we'll come back like just after the baby's born, and like you can have like, you know, your doula and all the people that you really want there, and I was like, okay, like I was thinking in my head, like there are men in the delivery room is relatively new as a concept, and Michelle Dent, the obstetrician, still says men shouldn't be in the delivery room. So I can see the perspective he's coming at and the merit in it, but it was still a busting of, you know, a fantasy.
It was painful. I remember you being really upset.
Yeah. And so, you know, that was another episode of me crying and having to work through that. And
you really spent some time, like I remember speaking to you about it, and you really spent some time allowing yourself to feel and mourn the loss of what you had, as you say, the fantasy of you already played out in your mind.
Yeah. And so, played through that. And again, it was coming back to, okay, well, what do I really value, and how important are these things to me? And can I do this on my own? And actually, is this a gift from him? You know, is this like a boat from God? Is this asking me to come into my own power in a way that I've never asked myself to before? And, you know, in this form. And so I was really like, okay, well, I still want this. And so how do I need to resource myself, knowing that he may or may not be in my primary space? And left it at that in my head, you know. And then a few more months passed, and there was a definite shift. And, you know, one of the main ways to sort of see that is in the bedroom, you know, in the conversations that we were having, and in his shift into yes, you know, let's do this. And I think part of that was him growing a deeper relationship with our daughter, and seeing more of her personality independent of the things that he felt like were hard. Because, you know, I think especially when you have a bigger age gap, you forget some of the different demands of babies and toddlers. And so he had this rose-coloured view of what Hugo was like, that he was like never like as demanding as Sylvie, which he was in his own way. And so as she's grown and found her voice more and her independence, he's, you know, loved on her more and been able to create more distance from the difficulty. And there was just a shift, I think, too, when he recognised that, you know, what you really, really value and the time we get to spend with our kids is often really fleeting. and that life is short. And it was a story of he told me late one night of a golfer, I think, who had been diagnosed with a terminal illness or something. And, this golfer was being interviewed and he was just like, saying it just puts into focus my kids and how important being with my kids is. And I think that really brought it home for Marcus. Really,
which is genius, really, when you think about how we filter our world only to what we need for our next evolution of growth.
Yeah.
He's seen, he could easily have ignored that, not seen it, not paid any attention to it, but he's seen someone speaking in his value system, so in sport, about his other value system, parenthood, and perceives it in a light such as, you're right, which is really just his unconscious.
Yeah, bringing that to him. Yeah. And so that was one of the turning points. And I think it was also him recognizing that it wasn't something that I was going to let go of so easily. And
because the way that you were framing it, correct me if I'm wrong, was you were having the hard conversations and parenting yourself through the feelings before and after those, but then also leaving him with, I get that, I respect that, but this conversation's not done.
Yeah.
It's still open.
Yeah. And I think when I look at what I've visualize most and what I see in my future, I see us with 3 children. I see that as a future. But I also see that creating that will come from having to lean into difficult places in my relationship that I've likely ignored, right? Like we will ignore pain until it becomes too big to not fate to, no longer avoid it, And so that was what one of my mentors was talking about when I was saying, I can't get out of my head this sort of heart yearning, this preoccupation with wanting to have another child. And she's like, yeah, maybe that's part of what you're seeing as growth for your relationship, and your relationship is such a high value for you, and family is such a high value for you that to grow in that way is a conscious path to choose. And so that was interesting to have that reflection, and I think also to look at motherhood as an entrepreneurial endeavour too. Like we were just talking about, the way that we revere successful, in inverted commas, business women or women who do it all. And we see women who run companies as some amazing feat, but we don't recognise that with every kind of child you're having to add more communication skill sets, more time management skill sets, more of like a CEO type mindset in terms of how you get everybody's needs met and how you get the ultimate outcomes.
Manage the home business.
How you manage the home. And while as a culture we don't tend to value the work in the home and the work of the parent and the mother, it's just a different form of the same thing that people are going out to try to govern in a workplace. It has its own set of challenges that we're having to work through and find solutions for. And so with that comparison, that was quite interesting too, because I'm like, yeah, I can see how it's also asking me to level up, and grow into a different version of myself as a woman and a mother.
And an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So we just landed at that place where we were having hot, amazing sex and we were like going for it. And there was not a stop anymore. There was and I would check in. I'm like, do you want to, like, are we doing this now? Like, are you really ready? He's like, yeah, let's do this. And then that's where we found our willingness. And I think to find it and agree in that space of intimacy is really powerful too. So here we are.
Baby number 3. How are you feeling?
Good now. And the first trimester is a lot of, you got the physical illness of it, but you've also got the growing into, okay, like I'm now mothering 3, like because this baby's here in some form already. Like even though it's not in my outer world, I'm feeling it now. I'm tuned into it now. Like I'm thinking about how I need to look after myself to look after this baby, and still hitting massive edges around time management and capacity and all of those things. But I think that that's natural. And I think if I wasn't, then there'd be a problem, because then there'd be something that I wasn't looking at if I wasn't willing to own the challenge of it. And I think a lot about the difference, as you would, the mother that you are when you're pregnant with your first versus the mother that you are every other time you're pregnant, and how you are a different woman being called to grow in different ways in relation to yourself and your identity, and also in relationship to everybody else around you. whoever you've called in to be part of where you're at.
So what does that look like for you?
I'm still figuring it out.
It's a good answer.
I'm still figuring it out. And thinking about, you know, where my kids are going to be at and how to still, you know, because a big thing for my husband is you know, sexual intimacy and how to still create that and nurture that, you know, with the demands of a newborn and a baby, because, you know, he'll make the offhand comments sometimes, you know, like it's another 2 more years. Like we've got, because that first 2 years is pretty big. It's pretty demanding. And so I can sense that he feels, he's almost like got that impending sense of loss of me in that. And so that's also a reflection on how can I expand more of myself to show up in more of my roles without having to cut parts of me off just to be a mother. You know, like how can I still be a central woman and see him and his advances and, you know, make space for them as well as make space for my baby and my other children.
And what are you thinking about that?
I think a lot of it is challenging my conditioning and separating
mother from sexual sensual woman.
Yeah, because sensual sexual woman was never modelled for me. I mean, that's been an enormous path of growth and continual unfolding. And so that's a practice.
And culture says they're separate as well.
Yeah.
Our culture.
And almost makes any suggestion of the two together as like taboo or
just generally not possible because, you know, you're the dried up, shriveled up woman from having children. Damaged goods.
Yeah. And I mean, it looks like being playful. Like even the other morning, like my kids are at an age now where they might like go and play in the lounge room for 10 or 20 minutes and not interrupt us. So I'm not averse to using that time in the bedroom. You know, whereas there would have been a time where I would have been too prudish or too, like, had that delineation of separation that was too strong to even be able to entertain that. And so I think it's like...
It's the next level of integration, really, isn't it?
And it's that circuit breaker of behaviours that separate my husband and I as opposed to behaviours that can create connection even in, you know, places that you would say are hard to. Because I think that's one of his really strong love languages. And if we're going to, you know, really
have a conscious family, you don't need to sacrifice a conscious relationship in order to have that. That's what you're seeking, really, isn't it? Yeah.
That's it. So that's what I'm thinking about at the moment.
What about your birth?
I'm really excited.
Tell us
and
about that.
Well, it's really interesting.
Because I know people are interested too.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. So you and I have had a couple of like conversations about, I was really intentional about interviewing and choosing midwives was like my first kind of step.
And you did that quite early. How many weeks were you when you were doing that?
I must have been about 10 or 11 when I really seriously was searching. And the wonderful thing about being in the world that you and I are in is that it's so nice to be so well connected. So I got lots and lots of different opinions and recommendations, and then had a few meetings and just really feel.
So how did you choose? When you say you had a few meetings, it's kind of like an interview process.
Yeah.
What are you looking for?
I'm looking for a midwife who is deeply connected and enamored with birth and with women's power and women's wisdom and with respecting the sanctity of women's bodies and honouring a woman's unfolding in pregnancy and birth, while at the same time being skilled enough and wise enough and humble enough to have the clinical experience and knowledge and ability to separate her own values with what she's faced with right in front of her.
Medically, talking about.
Medically.
If there was an instance where you would need to transfer.
Yes. Or if there was something in the pregnancy that was indicating that there's a problem, or if there was anything that wasn't adding up. And also,
what does that mean for you? So when you're saying I'm looking for someone who has that, what are you not looking for? Is that an easier question?
Yeah. I'm not looking for someone who is basically at the opposite end of an obstetrician on the scale in terms of their way. This is the right way.
So free birth, home birth at all costs.
Yeah, don't want that one.
Yeah.
Because I think that that's just the same, other side of the same coin in terms of, not looking at practically at what's in front of you and looking at the woman and her story and the baby and, just anyone who's got a hard line, right or wrong approach, because I don't think that that really serves the woman, and I think that it can get in the way of really being with a woman because you've got your own agenda that's driving things.
Both ways.
Both ways.
Yeah.
Right? On either end.
On either end, yeah, totally.
So really knowing that. Also a midwife who would provide me with all of the evidence and without pushing for their belief or their advice, but giving me everything that I need to make an informed decision. Because I don't know that that's necessarily what I've had in the past, and I think that might have been a little bit missing for me. And I'm really pleased to say that one in particular is amazing at that.
So you have 2 midwives?
2 midwives, yeah. One that I can chat to and lose time with and just feel like I want to give a hug to, like that I can welcome into my home. And
which creates the sense of known, trusted woman who is not jarring then in birth and who you are already comfortable opening to. So in birth,
your body opens.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's it, I think, in a nutshell. In a big nutshell. And then it's
do you feel comfortable talking about the hard calls you've made in terms of you've chosen not to have me at the birth?
Yeah, I have. That's been really hard.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
And so you and I, so Jules and I think there was a time when we had a bit of a debrief. It would have only been when Sylvie was a few months old.
Yeah, you weren't ready to enter any type of debrief, I didn't think. There didn't seem to be space.
I think what
and I think that's normal too. Don't.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty normal.
Distance.
Yeah.
I think that I really, really struggled with my my probably subordination to your wisdom, and didn't honour the gaps that I was filling in me to be safe. In where I'd found myself. And I definitely think that I was in a space when I was towards the end of Sylvie's pregnancy where I was trying to do all things and be all things to all people and was not centering myself as much as I needed to in exactly where I was to create the outcome that I said I wanted. And I think probably even the mirror of you, whether I was conscious of it or not, probably brought that to light, but that was not something that I was willing to see at that point. And so I've made a conscious choice this time, as much as it's really hard, to know what I need and to know my weaknesses. And one of my weaknesses is losing parts of myself by injecting the values of others. And I need to be really careful in a vulnerable birth space that I don't do that. So that is why I've chosen not to.
What about your mum?
She's not coming either.
Tell us about that.
So I really...
So these are really hard decisions.
Really hard.
That you have had to parent yourself through.
Yeah. With
now the, I would say, single-minded vision to... enough of the bullshit. How do I do this?
Yeah. So
what do I need?
I haven't actually had that conversation with her yet.
Haven't you?
No.
What's happened on your internal world?
Well, it's really interesting. So my pregnancy with Sylvie, at around 30 weeks, I got a really nasty kind of case of bronchitis, which lasted for weeks and weeks. And I actually quit my job.
I'm pretty sure we were recording L2L and you were like coughing your way through it.
Yeah.
Wasn't it L2L? Was it? One of them.
I think it was L2L. Yeah. It would have been. And I had a consult with a amazing facilitator and doctor. And he said to me, look, I really feel like there's a lot of grief sitting there, and I think it's your mother. I think you've got some big mother stuff going on. Like, how does that sit with you? And it was so true, but I still couldn't face it at that point in my pregnancy. I think that me knowing I was having a girl and me facing new layers of my relationship with my mum was really painful for me in that pregnancy. And then in my birth, whenever I would look at mum, when I was in labour, whenever I would look at her, she just had this expression of pain and like she couldn't be there. Like seeing me.
Anxiety.
Yeah, anxiety, complete lack of presence, just wanting it to go away. Like it just looked painful for her. She was not.
And that was in hospital.
Yeah, that was in hospital. Could you imagine at home? And so I realised then, and in fact, she ended up leaving because she got really tired. As soon as she left, I had like the biggest contraction I'd had in ages.
And remember, she had a car crash on her way there.
She had a car crash on her way there. Yep. Yeah, big stuff.
And then you had the biggest contraction after she left. Yeah, that's true, because you'd kind of plateaued a bit.
Yeah, I had. So really, really stepping into that decision, and I'm really okay with that. Like I really feel congruent with that.
So your birth now looks really different to Sylvie's birth because you don't have Marcus, you don't have your mum, and you don't have me. So when you think, I'm thinking about listeners, when you're thinking about structuring your birth, you're thinking, oh, I'll have the people I love the most with me because they'll support me the best. But in birth, you are walking your subconscious. So you've got to be willing to structure a space in which you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if you know your links have weaknesses there due to any factor, conscious, unconscious, belief systems, their own values and belief systems, their own stories that they carry, because we're energetic beings. Whoever is vibrating with an energy, you'll be vibrating at it too.
Yeah.
Particularly in birth, will change your outcome. So I actually get really excited when I hear this, Bridget, because I feel like in my head I have these visions of like the Amazonian queen, you know, rising in that crowd, kind of that chest goes back, and what she's got is a sense of ownership, and she is pulling her warriors to her, you know?
Yeah.
She's not the soft princess who needs to be cuddled by those closest to her. No, she's a warrior, and that's different.
And I think it's calling me into more of my own power. It's saying, well, what if there's no one that I think?
Who are you as birth on your own?
Yeah.
I think it's genius.
The only thing I haven't figured out is what I'm going to do with my kids. although Marcus might look after them.
I think that's kind of an amazing scenario, because that's always the hardest part, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I've got a neighbour who might be helpful, but you know, I've also chosen a friend who's a student midwife and a doula. So she's going to, and she's also a home birthing mum. So she's going to be she's following along the pregnancy and will be there too, and is on the same page as my midwives, and is again like more of that, like, you know, like that tribe of women, you know, like that you're calling in, who have that ability to hold space for however I need it. So I'm feeling really positive about it. And I was saying to my midwife, I was like, what if this could just be easy? Like, what if this was just, I go into labour and I just stay here and I just have the baby, and that's just what happens. You know, like instead of, like, as I went into labour with my son at home, and it's just like, well, why, if I have all the care I need and I'd really trust the people who are with me, why would I go anywhere else? It just makes more sense to me. So that's where I've landed with birth.
Sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing.
It's okay.
So how do we connect with you, Bridget?
We connect with me at suburbansandcastles.com.
And myself is thepleasurenutritionist.com. And we love your comments and your emails and your texts, and we promise we read them all. And if you would like to offer us some podcast suggestions, they would be deeply welcomed. Oh, and we're forgetting today, the day this is released, is Christmas Day.
Yes, it is. I wonder where
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. And I wonder where you find yourself on Christmas Day. Like, is it?
I wonder too. I wonder what triggers you might be able to write down and then combust them with us in Loathing to Loving next year. Or I wonder what beliefs, when you're thinking about manifesting, you're ready to just fucking let go of and create what you want to create in your life with intention. Because the only glass ceiling is yours. So come join Nourishing the Mother in our tribe, nourishingthemother.com.au, Nourishing the Mother on Facebook and Instagram.
And remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.